When you speak, are you identified with your mind, or is it possible to speak and still be present? That's the important thing, not to lose presence when the mind is engaged. There are already considerable number of people who are able to be present when they sit quietly or are not interacting with others, are in a helpful environment. They can be present. And still not that many who, an increasing number, yes, but not that many yet who can sustain presence even while the mind is engaged. That's the art, and that's what we need to learn. To be present while we're not being disturbed by any challenge is great. That's the wonderful beginning. The next is to bring presence into situations where the mind is engaged. So that you can, yes, the answer to the question, can you speak and be present at the same time? Yes. That is the only way you can say anything that has power or is fresh and new, or any creative insight that comes through the mind. There has to be presence even as you speak, even as you think. So how does that work? It's very hard to describe. But a good approach to this is to be present when you're listening before you speak. If you can be present while you listen, it's easier to sustain presence when you begin to speak. Or if you can feel your inner body while you're interacting with other humans, that can keep you present, so that your attention is not totally absorbed by thought processes. I recommend that highly. So while you're interacting, feel the aliveness in the background, feel aliveness in the body. And if you go deep into the body, there's spaciousness there. The more agitated the other person or persons is or are that you are communicating with, the more challenging it is for you to stay present while you're engaged in interacting, discussing, arguing. Whenever you meet a difficult person, it can be to you as immediately realize, well, here's my spiritual teacher. Because the challenge when you meet a difficult person, difficult really means unconscious, is to stay present while you're listening or speaking to that person. Another little hint is, don't speak in a stream that has no end. Make statements, say what you have to say, and then come to a cessation. In other words, bring in gaps into your communications. They don't have to be so long that other people notice it. The important thing is that you notice that there is a little gap. And so your attention is in the gap, which is space. Like this. Some powerful speakers do that. Either they do it intuitively, or maybe they have learned it. President Obama is a good speaker, a very good speaker. If you notice carefully, when he speaks, there's a continuous succession of tiny gaps. You wouldn't notice it unless it's pointed out to you. And that's why he's such a powerful speaker. Is he present while he speaks? Perhaps. You certainly couldn't call him reactive. So pay attention to the little gaps in your speaking. Make sure there are some gaps. So that's all practice. And then it's beautiful once you discover this ability of being present while you speak. The whole quality of your words changes. And you're not simply acting out past conditioning of your mind anymore, which is the case when you're not present. You can also learn it by listening to somebody who practices this already. When you listen to me, you can practice. It's also a kind of practice because as you tune in not only to the words, you also tune in to the underlying stillness. Because the stillness, I mentioned the gaps, important, short gaps. But the stillness is not only in the gaps. Even while you speak, there can be an undercurrent of stillness. And that's what you can learn from a spiritual teacher beyond the content of what he or she teaches. You can tune in to the speech, to the words, the flow of words. And by tuning in, realize there's not just the words there. As you tune in, you merge with the energy field that is there underneath the words and in between the words, the stillness. Because it's also there, it's not just in the gaps, it's also underneath. So that's a very different way of speaking than somebody who is totally absorbed by every thought that arises that then becomes a word, every string of words, strings of thoughts, becoming totally carried along, dragged along with every stream of words that comes. That's very different from, so you notice the difference in somebody who is present or conscious, that there isn't this being dragged along, that energy is not there. There is somehow, it's hard to describe, but I'm sure you can sense it. There is a peace. Let's use another pointer. There's a peace that surrounds the words or is underneath the words. stillness, peace, whatever you want to call it. It is peaceful to listen to someone like that, beyond the content of the words. But the fact that you are listening and you notice that in yourself means you're tuning in. And that's one of the functions of the spiritual teacher, is to enable the listener, disciple, listener, the other person, to tune into that dimension while they are listening. And then that dimension grows in you. That's part of the spiritual teaching. And that has not that much to do with the actual content or meaning of the words. So maybe I could read a newspaper article to you, it might still work. That's a slight exaggeration. But what I'm saying is, with the spiritual teaching, the primary thing is not the words, but the energy field in, around, or underneath the words, out of which the words come. That's what keeps you alive while you listen. And then you notice something in you comes forth and responds and recognizes. Now don't let the mind come in, as I said before, and then make the other person special because of that. But put your attention on that which recognizes perhaps a heightened aliveness, a heightened stillness inside you that you can sense while you listen. And that means it's working. So there's always far more than the content of what's being said. I would say it's secondary in spiritual teaching, or whenever you listen to somebody who is present and speaking. So that's something to practice here now and benefit from that. Consciousness, the unconditioned consciousness, recognizes itself in the other, the so-called teacher. But ultimately there is no other. Just seems to be. It's an awakening process of consciousness.